Hey y'all, welcome back to Yuhoo Talks. I know we took a little bit of break, but we're back in 2024. I only wanted to do a couple episodes this year. I only wanted to get on the best and the brightest before I get burnt out talking to too many people. And I knew the first person I had to get on was T.S. Luther. He talks comics over on TikTok. He's got a new comic, Tokyo Fire, coming out very, very soon. Definitely make sure to check it out. I'll link the info down below. But on top of that, he just has a great TikTok account. He talks about comic books, pop culture, media, and he has like a really great like vlog series where he just talks about his life and how it relates to being an independent creator, shows the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I really appreciate the authenticity he has over on his channel. So definitely make sure to go check him out. But yeah, TS, how you doing, man?
Hi, man. I'm TS and I write comics. I'm doing peachy, as you know from talking to me. I'm a little depressing, but that's okay. Comic books are fun. I love it, and the world is definitely not on fire, so it's all good.
Well, you know what is on fire is Tokyo. And so I'm curious, for those unaware, what is Tokyo Fire and when's it coming out?
All right, what is Tokyo Fire and when is it coming out? So Tokyo Fire is a cyberpunk dystopian comic book that I wrote with my pal Sky Hawkins. She's the co-creator and the artist there. And it basically is about these two street kids. They're homeless, they're unhoused, and they're trying to survive in Tokyo, which in this like dystopian future where the Chinese government has taken over half the world and radiation is rising up as the oceans rise, and they're there in this like repressive government keeping everybody down, and they're just trying to survive and get out. They're kind of two thieves. They're just trying to survive, and as they get caught in between superpowered gangs that start popping up and then superpowered cops that start popping up, they get roped into this revolutionary war, and they need to figure out if they just want to survive and get the heck out or make a difference and help the people that are stuck there and might not be able to do that. So they have to kind of reckon with themselves. And yeah, and it comes out soon. We're looking at 2 weeks from today, which is going to be like February 18th, right around there. So if you want to get a digital copy, you can do that. And if you want to pre-order the first print of the physical, you got to jump on board now. Go over to can'tbekilledcreations.com, feed my children, go get some comics.
Yeah, and like I said before, if you're watching this video on YouTube, I'm gonna make sure to link it down below. Definitely check it out. And so one question I did have is that I know for me personally, uh, when I create, I think the biggest moments of inspiration come from interpersonal experiences, and I also think the best pieces of art come from interpersonal experiences, having the authenticity of reflecting some element of your life and your work. And I'm curious if Tokyo Fire was born out of something close to you in that same capacity and what that thing might be.
Sure. So Tokyo Fire, is it inspired by anything in my real life? Like, is it coming from a place of authenticity? 1000%. So I was unhoused and homeless as a kid, quite a bit. I moved around a lot. My family kind of broke up a lot. And when I was 16, I was living in a van, basically living in a van down by the river. And me and my friends got a house together. They were also teenagers. And we were basically living in the house from Fight Club. We'd flush the toilet and the lights would flicker, and there was a bunch of punk rats just kind of chilling, and we had to find ways to survive, and sometimes that meant doing sketchy things and hanging out with sketchy people, and it meant really seeing the underbelly of our society and how much the government doesn't care about people and you're going to be left along the wayside. And then in reading a lot of comic books, you kind of want to marry that. You want to speak from a place that you can relate to. And when you have these street kids trying to survive in the cyberpunk world, well, I go back to me and my friends just trying to make a living and figure out a way to get out. And if we wanted to get out, or if we wanted to make our town better to a place where maybe if there were kids that in the same situation as us, we'd be able to help them.
No, that's beautiful. I really like that, and I'm really excited to read the comic and see that reflected there. Another thing you were talking about is that this is a book that takes place in this cyberpunk-esque dystopian future. That is such a huge genre. It has existed for quite a while. And I'm curious, as someone who is writing a book that takes place in that space, how do you respect the legacy of a genre that is so rich, but also avoid coming across as tropey? Just essentially doing something unique that respects the genre, but doesn't do it in a way that feels like cheesy or corny.
Yeah. So how do you respect the genre while like using the tropes, but not just leaning into the tropiness and just copying what everybody else did before? That's kind of a big one, and it's hard to do. I think you use tropes as a shortcut because people know the shorthand. People understand if you're in cyberpunk, there's going to be hackers, and maybe there's going to be mutants, and there's going to be flying cars, and the government sucks, and no one has insurance, and you got to pay to live. You know these things that you can kind of get in there. But the way that you pay homage is like realize what everybody likes about the genre, and that means you too. So what I loved about the genre is that it was really representative of today. Cyberpunk is only different than today because the technology is cooler, but that's a situation that we all live in now. Like I said, being homeless and living on the streets is not a new thing. That's a thing that existed for me back in the day. So it's about finding your way in that you can relate while using the things that you know the audience will understand. Tropes are not bad. Tropes exist for a reason. Tropes are there because people understand that shorthand, and you can really help your audience along on your really high, crazy concept ride that is a world with future governments and sci-fi mutants and powers and stuff. But you can use the things that you know they understand. Like if you see a person with a pixie cut and a part shaved out of there, and they have a VR goggle set on, you're like, oh, that's a hacker. They're gonna go into the Matrix. You just know that. So you use the tropes to your advantage and then show them the humanity that we can all relate to.
No, that's I think that's a great answer. And it's I don't really create comics, so it's not something I'm thinking about, but when I read something, it's something you notice. So I know it's a very, very fine line. Maybe more so for like horror, especially. I think that's where it can be really hard. But like within the realm of cyberpunk, I think it's also really important to like respect the texture of what they've already have. And I'm really happy to hear that response, and it makes me super eager to read the comic. Um, I guess this is the question I wrote down beforehand, but you kind of have already answered it, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Sure.
So Tokyo Fire definitely seems to revolve around some socioeconomic and political themes. I was watching the trailer you have for it on your TikTok account. Go check that out. It's a banger trailer if you guys haven't. And there was this idea in the trailer that really stood out to me is that bodies of law and order aim to uphold the status quo. That status quo benefits the rich and disenfranchises the poor, right? I'm curious, why specifically was this something important for you to talk about in this book?
Oh man, why is it important to talk about the fact that bodies of law tend to uphold the status quo and they disenfranchise people? And it was so important because that's the reality that we live in. Not to get to too strong army on you, but when you see cops, and not all of them are bad, not all of them are evil, but a lot of them are there to protect the rich and the powerful. And that is only more exaggerated when you look at poor people. That's just the reality of it. So if I'm going to write a book of the things that I know and the things that I've experienced, the things that I've seen, and the things that people can relate to in our world, it's hard to ignore that. If I'm telling a story about street kids who are trying to find their way out, the antagonists are the people that are creating the system that has allowed them to exist in such a sad way. And they don't do that on their own. You don't see a lot of politicians and rich CEOs out there making sure people are working hard and staying in slums. They have a thing for that, and that's called the police. That is law and order, as they tend to call it. So it just felt really important for me to show that. And also, if I'm going to be authentic and not full of crap, that is how it works. So it's important to show. And if you're looking for an antagonist that people can relate to, you can put a faceless, government there. But like I said, the arm of the law is really where the damage is done.
No, I honestly couldn't agree more, and I'm really glad you said that because that makes me even more excited to read this book. I think that's something not a lot of people recognize when reading stories about like a corrupt police officer. They view it as more as a individualistic thing rather than a systemic thing. So it's refreshing to hear that. I guess not refreshing, but it's important to hear that coming from a creative. And so final question I just had about Tokyo Fire. If there's one thing you want people to know about Tokyo Fire, like a blanket statement, whether that be the themes of the book, the characters, the settings, the importance of the book to you, what would that one thing be? What would you want to tell people about this book?
This book is far more than just another cyberpunk book. If I'm going to tell them one thing that they need to know about Tokyo Fire, it's that this book is not just about a bunch of kids who steal stuff, who run into super powered bad guys, because that's every book. If you want that story, you can go get it from X-Men. You can go check out a similar style in Promare, or from Studio Trigger. You can go play Cyberpunk 2077. What this story is really about is found family and deciding if you want to make a difference or survive, and the sad reality that those don't always exist together and sometimes are mutually exclusive, because often we are pushed this narrative that people have to make the difference. If we're going to get really reductive, let's talk about recycling. We were told growing up so often that you can save the world. Make sure you don't throw that can in the street. Go recycle it. Plastics need to be recycled. Completely fed this lie that we were the problem, and that it wasn't the government and these companies that were polluting the world and deciding that it's okay, let's just make them think that that's their problem. And we have to decide if we want to survive in that or make a difference. And it's hard to do both. As a dad, I can't always make the best decision for the world because I have to keep my children alive and safe and comfortable. And that comes at the conscious fact that sometimes I'm not being the best person possible. And you can't always do both of those things. So you have these two kids who have to decide if they want to save the world, save their city, save the people that they care about, or if they want to get out and out of that struggle. And you can't always do both. So if you're going to take anything from this book, if you're looking at it like, oh, wow, look, wacky cyberpunk hijinks, there's a little bit more under the surface for it.
No, that's awesome, and I really like that answer too. So I want to move on to just general questions I
Sure.
have for someone as a creative, someone who's a writer. For me personally, and I don't know if you can relate to this, I think the hardest part about starting a creative project for me is finding the inspiration to start the project. Once you get in the groove of things, it becomes a little easier. But like I think getting the creative juices flowing in a way that like gives you the drive to start something, that's not easy to replicate. And I'm curious, as someone who does this as a living, are there any general tips you've learned along the way about how to get the creative juices flowing when you find yourself in a rut?
Sure. Do I have any tips for getting the creative juices going? So, how to get over the dreaded writer's block? How do you get started on all these projects? Get the ideas out. So, for me, I play a lot of D&D and TTRPGs with my friends. So, I'm always trying to come up with a story, and then I sometimes retrofit it into comic books. But I'm also a storyteller when I'm hanging out with my friends, and I love to make the most entertaining anecdotes. I have kids, so I'm always telling a story with them when they're going to bed, or trying to entertain my wife after she works, a long day. So for me, the stories kind of come up and get the creative juices flowing because I'm always in that mode. Like that's my secret cap. I'm always telling stories. And so if you really want to get creative, start using it not just when you have the pen and paper in your hand and you go, I want to write a story. Start looking at any opportunity you have to be creative, and that will make sure your mind is always doing that mode. Easy for me to say. I super ADHD brain. My hyper focus is telling stories, but for me, that was what I would recommend: is use any opportunity you can, and that will start to trick your brain into thinking it can always be creative.
That's actually really good advice. I've never really thought of it that way. Um, but yeah, no, I guess another question I have in terms of the creative process, um, when you learn how to write comic books, I think the way you understand comic books changes from a technical level. And so I'm curious, since uh when you've started creating comic books, has the way you viewed the medium as a consumer changed, and what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So did consuming comic books change when I started writing comic books? 1000%. And how it did so was I look at everything so closely every time I read. It's almost exhausting when I pick up a book, because before I used to just look at the art sometimes, or I love the dialogue of the story and I'd have to flip back to look at the art that I missed as I'm going through a book. But now I look at every single piece. So obviously I'm looking at all the talent there. So what did this artist do in this panel? What did the letterer do for that speech bubble? How did the writer come up with this idea as you go through. But then you get even deeper and you go, okay, how did they weave this narrative? How did they come up with all of these ideas? And you start looking at it like you're trying to deconstruct a recipe. When you have like a really good, dish, and you're like, okay, if I were to make this at home, not only do I need to know all the ingredients that they use, but I need to know how would I change it? How would I have done this story? And it becomes this exercise every time I open a book that I rarely just read one just for fun and go, oh, that was dope. And I put it down. It becomes me trying to deconstruct and figure it out. And now I'm at the privileged point where I know some of these pros, and I've reached out to people and going, hey, can I get some dish? Can you give me some of this tea on how did you come up with this? How did you do that? So yeah, it just becomes an exhausting exercise of picking it apart. I still love comics. I still enjoy them, but now I'm trying to figure out the recipe every time.
Can I ask, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but is there any vain part of you that reads a comic sometimes and you go, "Oh yeah, I would have done that better. I would have done that differently."
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So do I ever read a book and go, could I have done that better? Yes, 1,000%. And that is partly why I started doing it. I have a lot of really cool, uplifting stories of reading a book and going, that book was amazing. I want to do that too. That's definitely there. Everybody has that. But there is definitely that vain, narcissistic part of me that goes, okay, this person is writing comics. I could have done that. I could have done that better. And I've talked about that in my little trope series where I talk about things. I'm like, you do this every time, don't do that. I've talked about the little shortcuts I see people use. I'm like, okay, that might work in this superhero book. I don't want to call anybody out, but it might not work if you're reading a little bit more prestige books. It happens a lot. And honestly, it just makes me better because if I see something and I go, oh, I could do that better, and I'll talk to my friends and I'll pitch them a story and test it basically. And if it does come out a little bit more positive, I go, okay, I am in the right field. I should be doing this because maybe I do have that skill set.
Totally. I think that's the honestly the hardest part about being a creator in any like medium is that you make something so you have that connection to it and you see other people make it and it really starts to affect the way you enjoy it because you view it more from a technical level. So like if you live, for example, say you make music and then you like listen to a new Billboard 100 song and it just pisses you off and you're like, this is garbage. I could make this, you know? Meanwhile, everyone's bumping it at the club. It definitely, and I can't imagine what that's like for something like comic books, a medium that I'm like almost consistently enthralled by. So
Mm-hmm.
I definitely appreciate that outlook. But another thing I wanted to touch on, and I know you've talked about this a lot as well on your TikTok channel, but I'm actually not sure how many people are involved with the project of Tokyo Fire, but within making a comic book, there's a lot of moving pieces. There's the author, there's the letterer, there's the inker, there's the illustrator, there's the editor, and it's not a one man job. And I think when creating something, there's definitely an element of like narcissistic vein and pride with your product and with your vision. What is the most important piece of advice you would give to another creator when working in a team to make a comic book, uh, to tell that creator, hey, you need to check yourself sometimes and listen to the team versus, hey, stick to your guns, you're right in this instance. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if I'm going to talk about it, so what's the best piece of advice I could give for collaborating with other people? What to hold on to, what to let go of? I would say number one, know what your skill set is. Know what you're good at. Know what you're bringing to the table, and the rest of it, let it go. Because you're not the best artist, you're not the best layout designer. That's why you hired an artist. That's why you partnered with one. That's why you are creating with other people. Everybody is allowed an opinion, and the best opinion should win. That doesn't mean it's going to be yours, and that also doesn't mean that they're not going to have a correct idea on your special, skill set. I get so much good writing advice from my artists and from my letterers and all the people that I work with. And remember that if you lean into their ideas and you look at it as our book, you are going to create something that's not just yours, it's ours. And if you're creating our book, that means they're going to give a crap way more than just being alone on that book. They're going to look at it as theirs, which means they're going to care, which means you're going to get the best book possible. If you hold on to that narcissistic idea that this is my book, number one, you're going to get really mad when anybody disagrees. And number two, you're not going to get the best product because they're going, oh, that's TS's book. I'll do my best, but it's not like it's mine. But if you listen to their ideas and lean into it and know that they're trying to make the best thing possible, it becomes our book. And then they really give a crap. I've gotten so much amazing artwork from people and amazing lettering and so many other parts of the process because they decided this is our project and I'm going to put 1,000% of myself in there. And that goes for the people that I've hired for books too, not just partnered with. Sky Hawkins, my co-creator on Tokyo Fire, we split the IP 50-50. This is my book, but it's just as much her book. And that came from the fact that we were okay with saying, hey, I want to do this art a little bit differently. Hey, I think we should do this with the story. We both have ownership over it, and we're making the best possible book as possible because I let it go and said, this is our book. We are a team.
No, I think that's really great advice, and I think it's also very important for people to understand uh, the importance of identifying their skill set when it comes to creating something because yeah, like I think there's a vision in someone's mind, but at the same time, there's always going to be someone that's better at doing something that they're not as great as doing. And I think just as humans, pride gets in the way of that, especially when art is involved, something as interpersonal as art. Um, I wanted to move on to a little bit of a different question, just about like the industry in general. I don't really know a lot about the comic book industry. I don't know about how writers and editors and letterers get paid, but I do know based on like what I've seen them talk about, most of the time it's not enough, even people that work for the big two. So I'm curious, as someone who's in the industry, what advice would you have for creators trying to get into the comic book industry as a career? And more specifically, what would you say to these people, what would you say to them in terms of letting them know how to temper their expectations and know how to measure their success when it comes to the monetization of their art?
So, what advice could I give to people getting into comic books when it comes to monetary success and tempering expectations? Well, when it comes to comics, you should know that number one, even the biggest names you've seen, they don't make their money from comic books. And when they're making comic books and they're making money, they're not making a lot of it. Those big names that you see were like are millionaires came from movie deals and came from merchandising. It did not come from the sales of their comic books. That's just not how they work. There's not a lot of money in this game. And unless you're one of those big names, or you have a lot of luck, or a lot of privilege, or a lot of one to cancel out another, you're not going to make it big when it comes to making money. That's just not the reality of it. That's not how it works. You definitely don't start making money. Sometimes you don't even end making money. So temper expectations there. Your success for me, how I measure it is, can I afford to make another book? Can I afford to get this one out the door? That's how I measure it. Now, if you have a lot of people that you need to support, if you have responsibilities, be careful getting into comics because it's going to take a long time to make any money, let alone enough to support yourself and other people. So know that going in. The other part that I have to remind a lot of young creators, I was just talking to one this morning about, am I going to be able to help them out and get them a job? Is they don't exist. None of us have money to pay ourselves, let alone new people. So even if you meet a pro who's willing to help you out and mentor you, they have no money to give you. You can't get blood from a stone, and we're all bleeding already. So it's there's only so much that we can do. So just know that just because somebody doesn't want to give you money doesn't mean they don't want to help. And it doesn't mean that this job isn't worth it. And there is money to be made. It's just going to come really slow. And this is a pay to play game. If you want to make it in comics, you got to pay a lot of people to do a lot of things. Even if you're a cartoonist and you're going to do it all yourself, eventually you're going to have to pay to have those books made and pay to have those books shipped and pay to have them marketed. You're not going to be able to do this with no money. So know that going in, it gets very expensive very quick. So if you don't love comics, if it's not the number one thing that you know in your heart of hearts that you have to do, be careful.
I think that's really great advice. No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I don't think people think about the technicalities of how much really goes into it. But speaking of how much really goes into it, I was curious. I know art, like creating art, is a very personal thing. We've talked a lot about how Tokyo Fire is means a lot to you because of your background, because of your upbringing, because of your childhood, because of like the things you're interested in right now. And I think there's a lot of bravery in putting that into your art. You kind of have to expose some of your insecurities within doing that. And I'm curious, is it hard? Do you struggle finding the right way to talk about these things when you started out? Is it easier now? Like, what advice would you have for people when it comes to dealing with more of these interpersonal, maybe scary experiences and putting them into the page in a way where they don't feel completely and totally vulnerable?
So, do I have any advice for using your personal aspects of your life, the scary stuff that you might not always want to share in your art? 1000% do it. Do it every single time. Put a piece of your soul into all of your art. Be honest, be brutally honest, be honest about the scary stuff. If anything, for yourself, it's a very cathartic feeling. If you go to therapy, being honest about your story, your narrative, does a lot for your mental health. And if you put that into your artwork, other people see that. It becomes more authentic than you have any idea when you're reading any other book because if you're showing your true self in your art and you're being honest about your experiences and that informs your characters, people will look at your characters and go, oh, that's a real person. That's a person that I can relate to. And you're going to inspire people who have gone through similar or just as difficult times in their lives, and they're going to be inspired. And if you can inspire people and show them honesty, you're going to find fans and you're going to find true super fans who really want to support you. And you get an authentic following that wants to do what you want to do. I've had so many people just inspired by the fact that I'm honest with these characters want to make comic books and see that it's possible. So yes, 1000% use it. Be honest with it. It's scary and it hurts. I know if you've seen any of my videos, you see me cry sometimes on camera. That happens just as much when I'm writing because you're bringing up a delicate part of yourself. You're showing those nerves, and that's okay. And we should be more open with the fact that we're not all perfect and our lives aren't perfect, shiny, happy things. And just because somebody else has it worse than you doesn't mean that you didn't have a hard time. Hard is relative, and put it into your work so other people can see that it's okay to not be great.
No, yeah, that's a really good point. One book I read last year was It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth by Zoe Thorogood, and it's this interpersonal diary. It's not diary, but it's kind of like a story about her life in an autobiographical format in the realm of comic books. And she deals a lot with her depression and her anxiety, and she talks about it in a way that is super authentic, almost to the point where it's a little uncomfortable. But I think that's what made that book so compelling to me. But on the flip side of that same coin, I was wondering, do you think there's a time where it's just too much, where it kind of gets into the territory of maybe like self-loathing, or you just like straight up, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, maybe like I can't think of the word. I was gonna say hedonism, but I don't think that's it. But you know what I'm saying, where it's like it's just how do you know when it's too much? Like how do you know where it's just to the point where it's like bashing the audience over the head with just like this is feel bad, feel bad.
Yeah, how do you know when what you're writing is too depressing? If you're going to get real and you're going to be honest about it, it is a fine line. But the thing that I try to watch for is, when you're talking to somebody and somebody overshares, you want to help that person, you want to be there for that person. But eventually, it becomes annoying because it's no longer a symbiotic relationship. You're no longer having a conversation; you're just listening. And when someone's reading, they're only ever listening. So there's already too much on that person's plate. We don't talk about it enough as writers that you're putting a lot on the reader to have to experience everything because you can't be there. It's not a conversation anymore. They're the only ones imbibing it. So you can't feel that out. So what I do is I picture myself telling this story to somebody. And when something's depressing and sad and you're hoping for some catharsis about sharing it, you can see the twist where you're now just hurting that person with your sadness. And I try to watch for that element. So picture yourself telling that to that story. And when you can see them go from being empathetic to cringing, that's when you want to pull it back a little bit. And I know that sounds silly that you're picturing another person, but honestly, it works. Or have a wife that listens to your stories and she goes, "Hey, that got a little too much." Like that went from sad to shut the fuck up.
No, yeah, I definitely see what you're saying. I don't know if you've seen the movie Iron Claw, but spoilers for Iron Claw. I know the real life story. There's like another brother that actually passed away, but they cut him out of the movie entirely because the director of the film was like, "That's too much for one movie, right?" Like, there's so only so much sadness you could do without ruining the narrative, but understanding when that moment comes in is really hard as well. But we're almost out of time here, so I just wanted to talk about Tokyo Fire one more time. And I'm just going back to Tokyo Fire. If there's the elevator pitch telling someone who maybe just hasn't really read a lot of independent comics in general, maybe this is someone who's really big on Marvel, really big on DC, they see Tokyo Fire floating around, and I guess generally they just want to get into indie comics. What would you say to someone just to get them in your boat, get them in your train, get them reading Tokyo Fire, getting them to expand their interest? Because I do think there is a lot of value in independent comics that I've only recently started to see, which is kind of messed up on my part. But essentially, the question is, what would you say to someone to make sure they understand the value of not only Tokyo Fire, but the value of independent comics?
Yeah. So, how to pitch the idea of indie comics to someone who only has seen, the big screen movies about comic books? Independent comics have no gatekeepers. They have no big brother saying you have to do this and you can't do that. So you get a lot of heart and soul in books that you don't normally see. You also see a level of creator that isn't in it for the money because there is no money. Not that there's a lot of money in comics, anyways, as we've talked about, but it's pure heart and soul. So when I tell you, hey, this is like X-Men meets that Scott Pilgrim movie that you heard of, you're picturing a lot of superheroes, maybe fighting bad guys in the government, but it's really funny. That's what it is. And that wouldn't come from a DC book because they have editors that know exactly how many Batman books and how many Batmans you need to have in your book for it to sell. And if it doesn't reach that Batman quota, well, we can't sell that book. And I don't have anybody telling me how many Batmans I can have in my book. I can put 0 Batmans in it, and it is amazing and fun and cathartic. And I get to tell my story of living on the streets without superpowers. And I don't get to have an editor that says, "Hey, that got too depressing there. And I don't know if you should be making jokes about eating stuff out of a trash can because our readers want more Batmans. Can you put more Batmans in it?" So you don't have to deal with that. So if you're looking for books that are a little bit more authentic and they're for the love of the game and maybe something that you wouldn't see because it's not super mainstream, you can check out the indie artists and writers and the indie books that you find here on TikTok.
Oh yeah, that was great. But yeah, we're almost out of time, so we're gonna end the conversation here. If y'all made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to check out Tokyo Fire. It's coming out soon. Make sure to check out TS on TikTok. I'll link his TikTok down below as well. But that was the end of the conversation. As always, hope y'all enjoyed. Thanks for watching.